Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Madi Chen and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Thousand Autumns, Volume 4, also known as Qianqiu by Meng Xi Shi. We're covering chapters 94 through 97, so as always, I hope you all enjoy! Chapter 94, Momentous Changes. Naturally, partaking from this boon was not criminal or inhumane, and it certainly didn't go against righteousness. But as it would drop them into an embarrassing situation right before everyone's eyes, a normal person would choose to keep their mouth shut. In truth, Shan Qiao had the vague feeling that, ever since their reunion at the Huang residence, Yan Wushi's attitude toward him had undergone some strange and subtle changes. If previously Yan Wushi had been full of malice, wanting to push him into death, then this time it looked more like Yan Wushi was taking pleasure in Shan Qiao making a fool of himself, wanting to embarrass himself in various ways. However, Shan Qiao had no idea what reason lay behind Yan Wushi's change in attitude. He could only assume that Yan Wushi had found a new avenue of entertaining himself. "I remember you liked fish, Ah Qiao," said Yan Wushi. "This minced fish is very fresh and tender, so I'm sure it'll be to your liking." As if to prove Shan Qiao's suspicions correct, Yan Wushi's face bore a hint of deep amusement. No matter how he looked at it, it was infuriating. The two of them stared at each other for a long while. By now, all the onlookers had caught on to the bizarre atmosphere. "I'm grateful for Sec Leader Yan's kindly intentions," Shan Qiao said slowly. "However, this humble Taoist possesses both arms and legs. Sec Leader Yan shouldn't squander that hard-won promise here." Yan Wushi raised an eyebrow. "Ah Qiao, you're someone who always keeps his promises, yet you're going to break your word for a request as trivial as this?" A notion suddenly came to Shan Qiao. "That's because Sec Leader Yan was the first to speak falsely," he said. "When did I speak falsely?" "You have such a poor memory, Sec Leader Yan. You clearly said that you only need opponents, not friends. How, in the blink of an eye, did this humble Taoist suddenly become the closest of friends with you?" "I wasn't speaking falsely," said Yan Wushi with a smile. "It's only that things have changed. Back then, I really did think so. But a person's opinion is bound to change over time. Even if you couldn't walk away from Tangzhen when you were 3 years old, Ah Qiao, does that mean that you still can't now?" Shan Qiao gave a slight snort. "I know someone who indeed can't walk away from Tangzhen." He was talking about the incident with Xie Ling. Surprise came over Yan Wushi's face as he purposely misinterpreted Shan Qiao's words. Truly, such a sentimental person. Then, aren't they even more suited to becoming the closest of friends with? This man was truly too shameless. No matter the situation, everything he did was always correct. Shan Qiao knew that he'd never prevail in a verbal debate. When he saw how everyone was watching them, he felt his face warm in spite of himself, and he suddenly thought this all ridiculously childish. He quickly lowered his voice and whispered, "We're in public, Sec Leader Yan. Have some more self-respect and save any arguments for when we get back." Yan Wushi laughed. "I only asked you to eat this spoonful of fish. How do I lack self-respect?" After saying this, he continued to thrust the spoon toward Shan Qiao, and Shan Qiao moved back to avoid it, even raising his hand to push it away. But with barely a flicker of movement, Yan Wushi flipped his wrist and the spoon somehow vanished before reappearing in his other hand, which he held out to Shan Qiao. His determination was clear. Neither of them appeared to move at all, but their sleeves flapped and they exchanged several blows in an instant. Everyone else stared, dumbfounded. Many of them were still lost on what was happening. Zhao Chiying was hesitating over whether she should step in and stop the fight, but quite a few Bixia sect disciples were taking it as a valuable learning opportunity. They watched the two men's motions with rapt attention, terrified of missing out on even a second. The moment they started fighting, Shiwu had wanted to get up and stop them, but Yuan Song grabbed him. "If Shishong can, he should watch closely," said Yuan Song. "Shutsun and Sec Leader Yan are only sparring. It's not a real fight, or else they'd have turned the whole place upside down already. How could they remain firmly in their seats otherwise?" But Shiwu was still worried. "Things were fine just a moment ago. Why did they start fighting all of a sudden?" Yuan Song watched their movements with rapt attention, his tone unconcerned. Perhaps something about Shitsuan displeased Sec Leader Yan, so he purposely picked a fight? Shiwu was shocked. Why would Sec Leader Yan be displeased with Shitsuan? Yuan Song had always acted mature beyond his age, but he didn't know everything. With his limited understanding, he couldn't explain. At Shiwu's question, he simply shook his head. It seems that Shitsuan gave him the cold shoulder just now, which made him unhappy. Having gained this new revelation, Shiwu carefully ruminated on these words. Yet he still felt that something was off. The two men continued to fight. Each blow they exchanged was exquisite, and the crowd was unable to tear their eyes away. They'd even forgotten why the fight began in the first place. Yan Wushi held a spoon in his hand, using only his wrist and arm to meet Shen Qiao's strikes. With his other hand, he took the opportunity to flick several of the peanuts on the table toward Shiwu. Seeing this, Shen Qiao naturally had to shield his disciple. His sleeve billowed as it first flapped, then furled. It made for a lovely sight, accompanied by a sense of effortless freedom characteristics to Taoism, and the witnesses felt their minds and bodies relax. It wasn't only the Bixia sect disciples. Even Zhao Chiying and Yue Kunchi revealed expressions of awe. However, at this very moment, Yan Wushi reached out and wrapped his arm around Shen Qiao's waist, then delivered the spoon right to Shen Qiao's mouth. He struck at an acupoint with the hand on Shen Qiao's back, and when Shen Qiao instinctively tried to evade, his guard against the spoon fell. Thus, the fish soup slid straight inside. These actions happened within a single breath. Shen Qiao had no time to react. Once finished, Yan Wushi immediately pulled back and retreated bodily. He smiled as he said, Taoist Master Shen is so dishonest. Your words don't match your heart. If you wanted to eat it, why spend so long declining and wasting my energy? If only you'd simply opened your mouth earlier. This was really... Shen Qiao swallowed the fish with difficulty. He was torn between leaving the banquet in a rage and simply pummeling Yan Wushi head on. But the former would be terribly rude to the host, and the latter would look like him making a mountain out of a molehill. But this was really too shameless. If he let even this slide, he might as well let everything go. Do I, Shen Qiao, really look like such a pushover that you can treat me like a plaything trapped in the palm of your hand? Shen Qiao's face went dark. This time, he was truly enraged. However, he didn't lose his temper because that would put Zhao Chiying and the others in a difficult position. Instead, he simply nodded and said indifferently, Sec Leader Yan, your skills are beyond mine. I am not truly your match and therefore must thank you for your guidance. Then, he raised his cup at Zhao Chiying. I'm grateful to Sec Leader Zhao for taking care of Shiwu while I was away. I'm not good with wine, so I offer a toast of tea to Sec Leader Zhao instead. Zhao Chiying swept a glance at Yan Wushi. His face still held a smile, but she couldn't determine the emotions behind it. They were difficult to grasp. She spoke candidly. Shen Daojiang need not be so courteous. You've done our Bixia sect a great kindness, and we share a deep friendship. Please, don't take a small matter like that so seriously. Even if there were 10 Shiwu, Bixia sect would still be capable of caring for them all. If we're talking about the amount of food, Shiwu eats even less than Ye Xue. Shiwu blushed. You can't make that kind of comparison. Zhou Jiejie is older. Everyone couldn't resist laughing when they saw his face, and the tension from earlier dissipated like smoke. Once the banquet was over, Shen Qiao bade farewell to Zhao Chiying and the others, then brought Shiwu and Yuan Song back to their respective rooms to rest. After taking care of them, Shen Qiao returned to his own house, but found someone standing before his door. The man's features were crystal clear under the moon's bright glow and the lanterns hanging from the eaves. Shen Qiao's anger had yet to subside, and he was loath to say anything to him. Even if I can't afford to provoke him, he thought, surely I can avoid him. So he silently turned right around to leave. But Yan Wushi moved faster than he did. Shen Qiao only managed a single step before his arm was caught. Shen Qiao yanked his arm away and stood still, face expressionless. Sec Leader Yan, please have some self-respect. Yan Wushi was all smiles. What? Are you upset? Shen Qiao said nothing. I was only messing with you. No malice intended. If I upset you, let me make amends. I really can't afford to receive Sect Leader Yan's amends, said Shunqiao stuffily. Previously, you said you didn't need friends and that this humble Taoist wasn't qualified to be your friend. I accepted that. Later, I saved you, but that was only because your life was linked to Yuan Yong's, and the North can only be stable if the Zhou dynasty is as well. There were no personal feelings involved, and I never expected you to thank me or pay me back. Now that you've recovered from your injuries, we should go our separate ways. Sect Leader Yan has his glorious path, while this humble Taoist will walk his lone wooden plank. I am a poor man with nothing to my name, so I don't understand what I've done to deserve your good graces, so much that you must constantly try to humiliate me. This humble Taoist asks that Sect Leader Yan be gracious. Please inform me why, and I will make the appropriate changes. Qi Fengge had influenced Shunqiao greatly, and Shunqiao himself was also gracious and magnanimous by nature. He was always generous with his goodwill and kindness when interacting with others, even if it came with what should have been deep-seated grudges. Even after Yu Ai hurt him, Shunqiao had been heartbroken and furious, but once it was over, he didn't spend day and night gnashing his teeth and dreaming of ways to bring misfortune to his shudi. Yan Wushi was the only exception. Ever since he'd fallen from the cliff, their fates had become intertwined. The old scores between them, gratitude and resentment both, couldn't be simply broken down into who owed whom more. But as the saying went, once a man is bitten by a snake, he'd spend 10 years jumping at the sight of a rope. Currently, Shunqiao truly wished to avoid him. Out of sight, out of mind. But things hadn't gone as he hoped or expected. Even now, he didn't understand. This world held thousands of people more outstanding and beautiful than Shunqiao, and thousands of people more downtrodden and miserable than him as well. Exactly why did Yan Wushi insist on adhering to Shunqiao and Shunqiao only, unwilling to let go? Various unhappy experiences had been piling up for a while, and a sense of grievance and frustration suddenly surged within his heart. But it was hard to voice. Shunqiao only felt thoroughly exhausted in both body and mind. In Yan Wushi's eyes, that aggrieved, dejected expression of his was terribly adorable, and at this moment, Yan Wushi's lips, originally curved with amusement, became stained with the gentleness of moonlight. But this gentleness was so subtle as to be imperceptible, and Shunqiao naturally failed to notice it. "When has my venerable self humiliated you?" asked Yan Wushi. "If I really wanted to embarrass you, I have far more ruthless tricks up my sleeve. Why would I play that kind of harmless prank?" Shunqiao was furious. "You call that harmless? Before everyone's eyes, you... As rage exploded through him, he momentarily stumbled over his words and found himself struggling to continue. Yan Wushi sputtered a laugh. All right. Just let me apologize. Calm down. My venerable self will personally make you a bowl of soup as amends. How about that?" Shunqiao turned his head away. "No need." Yan Wushi tugged him along. "Even if the words I said in the past hurt your feelings, there's nothing I can do. Once out of my mouth, words are like water spilled on the ground, impossible to take back. My venerable self will never do something as childish as regretting what's already happened. As an enlightened master of Taoism, are you going to act as the talentless masses do and cling to the past, unwilling to forgive? Everyone says that Taoist Master Shun is a generous and magnanimous man who lets bygones be bygones. Why do you treat this venerable one so specially then? Or is this a sign that we're destined to be?" Shunqiao was so angry he laughed. "If it's destined for calamity, yes." Yan Wushi was unconcerned. Destined for calamity or destined for happiness, both are still destiny. Your Taoism often speaks of working in accordance with the flow of fate. So why, when it comes to yourself, are you unable to let nature take its course? "From how I see it, you shouldn't be called Yan Wushi," said Shunqiao. "Then what should I be called?" "Zong You Li, because you're always right, no matter what you say." Yan Wushi burst out laughing. He dragged Shunqiao to the kitchen. The chef had been using the place in the afternoon, so some fresh ingredients still remained. "Give me 15 minutes, said Yan Wushi. Shunqiao frowned. I'm not hungry. Yan Wushi didn't even look back. True, you're full with rage. Shen Chao choked at his words. Yan Wushi indeed moved swiftly. By using his internal energy to stoke the flames, he greatly increased his efficiency. Hot water was swiftly boiled. Then fish meat and eggs scrambled with starch were mixed and shaped into balls. He cooked them in the steaming water, sprinkled some green onion and salt on top, and fresh off the stove came 2 bowls of piping hot fish ball soup. Martial artists also needed to eat and sleep. No matter how well respected a man Yan Wushi was, he couldn't always bring a servant when traveling outside. So there were still times when he had to cook himself. Shen Chao had already witnessed his cooking skills when the two of them were hiding from disaster back then, so he wasn't particularly surprised this time either. Shen Chao scooped up a fish ball and popped it into his mouth. It was, he found, quite delicious. Although his anger had yet to subside, he couldn't go against his conscience and say it tasted bad, so he ducked down and began to eat silently. Yan Wushi held his own spoon out to him. What? Asked Shen Chao. Wasn't I going to make amends? Said Yan Wushi. Shen Chao was baffled. Then why give me a spoon? Yan Wushi laughed. It upset you when I fed you earlier, so now you can feed me. That way, we've both had our turn. Isn't that fair? Shen Chao was speechless. Right now, what he really wanted to do was upend this bowl of fishball soup over Yan Wushi's head. The days at Bixia sect were comfortable and monotonous, yet time still passed quickly. With Zhao Chiying and the others as witness, Yuan Song officially underwent the apprenticeship ceremony with Shen Chao. While Shen Chao instructed his disciples, he also continued practicing his own martial arts. As days passed, his internal energy gradually advanced toward his former level, and there were even vague signs that he was approaching a breakthrough. Though Zhao Zhiying was worried about Bixia sect's lack of new talent, she also knew that the most important matter was to properly instruct Fan Yuanbai, Zhou Yexue, and the other current disciples. Otherwise, they'd end up squandering their current saplings before they could find any beautiful jade to work with. With masters like Yan Wushi and Shen Chao present, it was inevitable Zhao Zhiying would raise her expectations of the sect's disciples. Her demands became stricter, causing everyone to moan and groan and beg Yue Kunshi for help. Yue Kunshi, that bleeding heart, was caught between his shimei and his disciples, and found himself frazzled in the daily state of chaos. Yan Wushi had also seemed to have rooted himself at Bixia sect. He said nothing about leaving, and Bixia sect couldn't make him go either. Furthermore, Yan Wushi would sometimes impart to them some martial guidance, even if this guidance was accompanied by jeering more cutting than knives. Bixia sect could only weather it, equally suffering and grateful. The passage of time meant little within the mountains, but beyond them, the world had undergone many changes. After Yuan ascended to the throne, he gave Buddhist master Xueqing the title of state preceptor and poured his support behind Buddhism. With the pretext of praying for blessing for his mother, he began to perform large-scale renovations of Buddhist temples. Buddhism's influence had suffered a heavy blow during Yuan Yong's reign, but now it began to show signs of another great rise. Meanwhile, Yuan also elevated He Huan sect, imitating what the previous emperor had done with Huanyue sect. He allowed their influence to permeate the court and monitor the officials, and he also let both He Huan sect and the Buddhist discipline shore up their authority all over the Jianghu for their own use. Under these circumstances, both the Buddhist discipline and He Huan sect took the chance to undergo explosive expansions, starting from Chang'an and spreading north. Faced with this pressure, many smaller sects either submitted themselves to Buddhism or were assimilated by He Huan sect. As for Lingyan Temple and Duyuan House, and other Buddhist sects relatively unknown within the Jianghu, the imperial court soundlessly seized control of them, placing them under the state preceptor's direct jurisdiction. And when it came to small sects like Taohua Pier or Pingshan Hall, He Huan sect annihilated them all. Even Zhongnan sect, which was fairly well known, fell apart with their sect leader's death and was eventually forced to surrender to He Huan sect. Almost overnight, Huan sect and the Buddhist discipline rolled forth, crushing all that came beneath them like wilted leaves or twigs, swiftly expanding their power and influence and transforming into leviathans. A little more than half a year later, the predictions Yan Wushi had made all came true. Chapter 95. Invitation. Early one morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at the foot of Mount Tai. He ascended the mountain, sword in hand, his steps as light and graceful as if he were treading over flat ground. It wasn't long at all before he was already halfway up the mountain, outside Bixia sect's gates. Zhao Zhiying was leading the disciples in sword practice when she heard the report from Fan Yuanbai, who was on duty. He said that someone had arrived from Qingcheng Mountain's Chunyang Monastery and was currently waiting for her. Bixia sect and Chunyang Monastery had a fairly good relationship. They'd had many back-and-forth dealings, but as Bixia sect waned and Chunyang Monastery grew, the friendship inherited from the previous generations gradually faded. Though Chunyang Monastery had never looked down on Bixia sect's lower status, the two were still separated by a vast difference. For example, when Bixia sect experienced its previous crisis, distant waters couldn't quench a close fire. If not for Shen Chao dropping out of nowhere, it would have been far too late by the time Chunyang Monastery received the news and came to their aid. News of happenings below the mountain trickled in bit by bit. Zhao Zhiying didn't know as much as Yan Wushi, but she had heard of Huan sect and the Buddhist discipline's rapid expansion. Bixia sect was on a remote mountain, distant from imperial rule, so, for the time being, they could afford to pay attention to only themselves. But now, Chunyang Monastery had sent someone to them, and that meant an urgent matter. As she was thinking, the visitor was led inside by Fan Yuanbai. His expression was frosty, his bearing dignified. His steps were steady, and even as he walked, the grip on his sword remained firm, without the slightest quiver. It seemed that Chunyang Monastery had found its successor. Zhao Zhiying sighed to herself. She was somewhat envious. Li Qingyu, disciple of Chunyang Monastery, greets sect leader Zhao. So, you're Abbot Yi's favorite disciple? She said. As expected of one of the twin jades of Qingcheng, Abbot Yi is truly fortunate. Sect leader Zhao is too kind. I was in seclusion for a long time. Even though I've exited, I still haven't had the chance to meet with Abbot Yi. I trust that his martial arts have scaled even greater heights. It was obvious that Li Qingyu wasn't a martial artist accustomed to exchanging pleasantries. To tell the truth, this one came as a messenger on behalf of Liuli Palace, he said. It regards the matter of the sword trial conference. Sword trial conference? Zhao Zhiyi and Yue Kunshi exchanged a glance. If I remember correctly, the sword trial conference takes place once every 10 years. Isn't this only the 9th year? That is so, said Li Qingyu. However, a few days ago, someone from Liuli Palace visited us, saying that they planned to hold it early and wished to use Chunyang Monastery as the venue. Shutsuan agreed, so I came to deliver the message and invite sect leader Zhao. Fangjiang Isle was an island, one that was impossible for most people to find. There was only one sect on that island, Liuli sect. They were self-sufficient and rarely participated in the conflicts between the powers of the Jianghu. Yet, they were also fond of making records of the Central Plains martial arts circles. For example, rankings like the world's top 10 martial artists that were so often discussed were created by none other than Liuli Palace. And they were also the ones who organized the once-a-decade Sword Trial Conference. The disciples of Liuli Palace were neither impressive nor famous when it came to martial arts, but due to this tradition, members of the Jianghu would still give them some face whenever they met. After all, the sect had little worth coveting, so there was no point in making a mortal enemy out of them. If someone was dissatisfied with the ranking, they could simply seek out the martial experts ranked ahead of them. There was no need to make things difficult for Liuli Palace. If any great martial advancements happened within those 10 years, the names on the next ranking would naturally change. As the saying went, no first place among scholars, no second place among martial artists. Martial arts wasn't something you could obtain through deceiving others. Who was the true number one, who was stronger, those things would be determined at a glance. Even if two masters appeared to be equally matched, a single duel would be enough to distinguish victor and defeated, superior and inferior. The sword trial conference was where the Jianghu rankings were determined. It happened once a decade, and invitations were sent out en masse. Anyone could participate to spar and test their skills. As Liuli Palace was in a remote area, they'd borrow a venue from a sect within the Central Plains and host it there. The sect in question could take the opportunity to bolster their reputation, so they'd naturally be willing. As the ones in charge of the rankings, their insights were keen despite not being martially impressive themselves. Everyone trusted Liuli Palace's rankings because they were almost always free of errors, such as in the case of Qi Fengge, who did not participate in the sword trial conference 10 years ago despite still being alive at that point. Even so, he remained in first place, and it was seen as deserved. No one voiced any complaints. Over the years, as Liuli Palace rose to fame, many rankings emerged one after another. They'd yet to hold another sword trial conference since the likes of Qi Fengge and Cui Wang passed. As the next ranking from Liuli Palace would take too long, people began making their own lists of top 10 martial artists. Though Shen Qiao never used to show his face in the Jianghu, they'd entered him into the rankings because he'd succeeded Xuandu Mountain. After he dueled Kunye and fell from the cliff in defeat, those busybodies also added Kunye and Yu Ai's names. But as Liuli Palace hadn't created those rankings, many people's hearts naturally surged in excitement and anticipation the moment news that Liuli Palace would hold the sword trial conference emerged. Other than rankings like the world's top 10, Liuli Palace created various other lists as well, such as those for swords and sabers. Since the sword was the king of all weapons, the land had a vast number of sword users, and sword master rankings also became the focus of many people's attention. True martial arts grandmasters who'd entered echelons occupied by Qi Fengge, Yi Pichun, and Buddhist master Xue Ting didn't need to use Liuli Palace's rankings to bolster their own reputations. Their names being on the list or not didn't affect their fame at all. The ranking was merely an extra touch, like embroidering flowers on extravagant brocade. As for Shen Qiao, he couldn't care less about these things. Even if he were still in charge of Xuandu Mountain, even if Yu Ai's plot against him had yet to happen, he probably still wouldn't have sent anyone to the sword trial conference after receiving this news. But exceptions aside, there were still many who needed to use Liuli Palace to boost their fame, and Liuli Palace also needed a way to validate their existence. Both parties benefited. Zhao Chiying didn't crave fame, but currently, Bixia sect needed to recruit new disciples for their long-term development. If she or Yue Kunshi managed some achievements during the sword trial conference, they'd gain a fair number of admirers who'd come forth to learn martial arts from them. "I'm grateful to Abbot Yi for sending word to us about the conference," she said. "Bixia sect is so remote. If we waited for outside news to arrive by itself, I fear we wouldn't have made it in time." "If sect leader Zhao has finished with her preparations, this one can accompany her there," said Li Qingyu. "That way I can also assist you on your trip." "No sects you need to inform Li Daoyou?" Normally, Liuli Palace is responsible for informing sects across the land, but since Chunyang Monastery and Bixia sect have always had a good relationship, Shutsun had me come here. We heard that Bixia sect suffered a crisis a while back. Because of the vast distance separating our sects, we were unable to offer our assistance in time. We hope that sect leader Zhao doesn't hold it against us. As he was Yi Pichun's personal disciple, his status was higher than normal. Rumors said that he was likely to inherit Yi Pichun's mantle, making him Chunyang Monastery's future leader. And when it came to martial arts, Zhao Chiying might even be a level below him. His personally coming here to deliver the news was already giving Bixia sect more than enough face. Of course, Zhao Chiying knew this, so she treated Li Qingyu with great courtesy and didn't face him with the attitude of a sect leader. "I also know that distant waters cannot quench close fires," she said, "so I didn't wish to trouble Abbot Yi. I'm already deeply grateful that Abbot Yi remembered us regarding this matter. I'll explain things to our disciples, then we can set out tomorrow. If Li Daoyou doesn't mind, you may stay here for tonight." Li Qingyu nodded. Feel free to do as you wish, sect leader Zhao. But suddenly, he seemed to recall something. May I ask, sect leader Zhao, Shen Chao or Shen Daoxiong, is he also at Bixia sect? Shen Chao had planned to guide his disciples through sword practice that morning, but Yan Wushi invited him to spar at the mountain summit. Yan Wushi said that it had been a long time since he himself had practiced the sword, so he wanted to exchange a few moves with Shen Chao. He even borrowed a sword from Yue Kunchi, but unexpectedly, Shen Chao remembered something. What happened to Tai Hua? He asked. You traded with Sang Jingxing for it that day. In the past, Yan Wushi had fought Cui Yowang and lost. His Tai Hua also fell into the other man's hands, which was how it ended up with Cui Yowang's disciple Sang Jingxing. But Yan Wushi was extremely arrogant. No matter how excellent the sword was, it was still a mere worldly possession, something separate from himself. If the enemy took it away, first it became a weakness that could be exploited, and second, it compounded the humiliation of defeat. So he decided to give up on the sword. Instead, he created the spring water's finger technique, unrivaled in all the world. So, when he'd exchanged Shen Chao for Tai Hua then, he didn't actually care about the sword at all. He merely wanted to take the chance to humiliate Shen Chao, to make him understand that he was worth less than a sword. That way, he expected, Shen Chao would sink into a state of absolute despair over the human heart. As for Tai Hua, after taking it back from Sang Jingxing, he instantly tossed it to Yu Shengyan without even a second glance. Still, no matter how egotistical Yan Wushi was, he knew very well that he couldn't speak these thoughts out loud or Shen Chao's current placidity toward him would be utterly annihilated. Perhaps the Yan Wushi from back then had never expected that a day would come when he'd fall into a pit he'd dug himself. Fortunately, Shen Chao didn't pursue the matter further, but brushed it aside after asking that single question. The two of them dueled on the mountain summit. After they had exchanged hundreds of blows, the sun peeked out, its golden rays spilling over the mountainside and illuminating their surroundings. Shen Chao lost by a small margin, but it wasn't because his swordplay was lacking. Rather, his internal energy had yet to recover its previous highest point. In contrast, with the help of the Zhuyang strategy scroll, Yan Wushi had been able to repair the flaw within his demonic core in only 3 short months, and his skills had grown even greater. He'd indeed been blessed with heaven-given talents. They were awe-inspiring to behold. Those endowed with extraordinary talents were always arrogant and ambitious, and they'd find it difficult to accept the existence of people who were even more gifted than themselves. But Shen Chao didn't have this issue. His temperament was mild, and he maintained a generous heart toward everyone and everything. Whenever he encountered a problem, he'd examine his own mistakes before blaming others. Now he sheathed his sword and straightened, then cupped his hands. When my late master was still here, he once mentioned that sect leader Yan would be his equal within a few years. Sure enough, that has come true. This humble Taoist is grateful for your guidance. I have learned much. This was no empty flattery. He truly believed that Yan Wushi was stronger than he was, and thus his gratitude was sincere as well. He felt neither envy nor fury at his defeat. A win is a win, and a loss is a loss. There was no need for other emotions like resentment or anger. To Shen Chao, things were just that simple. Yan Wushi thought that he could look at Shen Chao's earnest expression hundreds of times without growing bored. In the past, he'd wanted this man to fall into the pitch-black abyss, to hate and curse the world. But now he adored his warm and gentle heart with the same fervency. He savored the other man's expressions again and again, and he smiled as he said, "Ah, Qiao, your words are far too distant considering our current relationship." What current relationship? Shen Chao's mouth twisted as he forced himself once again to endure an irrelevant remark from Yan Wushi. If he couldn't stop himself from retorting, he knew that he'd be on the receiving end of another flood of twisted reasoning. He silently lambasted him with 'zong you li several times, but said, "It's getting late. I should return to teach Shiwu and Qilang some swordplay." The two of them descended from the mountain summit, one after the other. The one in front walked with somewhat hurried steps, while the one behind was neither fast nor slow. A consistent distance of 5 paces remained between them, which also reflected their current relationship. The mood hovered between irreproachable and eerily ambiguous. Their relationship was like a snapped lotus root that, on closer inspection, remained still linked by dangling threads, heavy with words and feelings unvoiced. When Shenqiao returned to the grounds of Bixia sect, he saw a man standing by his door. The person in question seemed to have also seen Shenqiao walk toward him from afar, for a trace of a smile emerged on his cold, youthful countenance. It was an expression he hadn't even shown in front of Zhao Chiying. It's been a while, Shen Daoxiong. Chapter 96. Fish-Headed Soup. Shenqiao froze, but once he realized who the man was, a smile appeared on his face as well. Li Gongzi, it's been some time. How have you been? I've been well. Li Qingyu wasn't the type to be free with his emotions. The unprecedented smile he'd revealed earlier was already terribly rare. It was a restrained smile, one that quickly vanished as his face returned to its usual placid calm. But one could still sense the delight that hung about him. Shenqiao, too, had a favorable impression of Li Qingyu. That day, though the other man had first shown him contempt, he'd lent Shenqiao his sword and helped him defeat Duan Wenyang. It was clear that he actually possessed an emotional, willful personality. He just wasn't good with words and thus came across as aloof. Cold outside, but warm inside. While I was in Chang'an, I could only fight my way out of the siege with Tilang thanks to the assistance of your Shuxiong's family. How is your Shuxiong Su Chao doing right now? Li Qingyu nodded. He is quite well. After He Huan sect forcibly assimilated Zhongnan sect, the Su family and a couple other disciples came to Qingcheng Mountain. They're safe and sound now. Shenqiao breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. It's unfortunate that Chang'an's current situation is rather dire. They probably won't be able to return for a while, will they? Li Qingyu made a noise of agreement. How has the recovery of your martial arts been, Daoxiong? If you have the time to spare, would you mind giving me some guidance with a spar? As someone obsessed with the sword, Shenqiao looked to him like a precious blade that had yet to be unsheathed, concealing its sharp edge with wondrous surprises. Enthralled, he practically itched to examine and ponder every inch of Shenqiao's body, though he had no impure intentions. Faced with Li Qingyu's blazing glaze, Shenqiao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He'd only managed this one word when Yan Wushi answered for him. Ah Qiao is going to teach his disciples now. I'm afraid he doesn't have any time for you to waste. If you wish for guidance, my venerable self will advise you with a spar. Li Qingyu stared at him. Who are you? The corners of Yan Wushi's mouth twitched. If you can defeat this venerable one, I will give you my name myself. Li Qingyu's gaze shifted downward, and for a moment, it stopped on the wooden sword he held in his hand. Then he suddenly shook his head. You don't often use a sword, and you possess a great jumble of skills. You aren't Shenqiao's equal in this sword, and my internal energy is currently inferior to yours. There's no point in fighting. Yan Wushi's smile was warm and kind. My venerable self has never seen someone this self-aware. You are truly the first. Li Qingyu's gaze quickly sharpened. The two of them stared at each other for a moment. Then he nodded. So, you must be Huanyue sect leader Yan. Yan Wushi raised an eyebrow. You recognize this venerable one? Said Li Qingyu. Rumors say that the Huanyue sect leader's egotism is unmatched in the world. Seeing you today, I can tell that it's a well-deserved reputation. It was only their first meeting, and the two men were already at loggerheads. It was completely beyond Shenqiao's expectation, and he said, Sect leader Yan, Li Gongzi is Bixia sect's honored guest. He'd yet to finish when Yan Wushi laughed. Then let my venerable self see just how capable this honored guest is. He extended his index finger, the movement as swift as lightning, yet also beautifully flawless. It was the renowned spring water's finger technique. Shenqiao wanted to stop him, but it was already too late. There was a loud clang. Li Qingyu's Qiu Shui had only half left its sheath, and that half a blade perfectly blocked Yan Wushi's index finger. After that moment of brief contact, Li Qingyu retreated 3 steps, and his sword was forced back into its sheath. Yan Wushi withdrew his hands and stood still, entirely motionless. The difference in strength was stark. But this was also within expectations. Li Qingyu was, without a doubt, a martial expert of the younger generation, so of course he wasn't Yan Wushi's match. He too had said it just now, that his internal energy was inferior to Yan Wushi's. It was Yan Wushi who'd forced his hand, demonstrating the malicious desire to bully a junior. Li Qingyu gripped his sword while cupping his hands, suppressing the surge of emotions within him. Sect Leader Yan's internal energy is truly too imperious. I am no match for it. His emphasis on internal energy meant he believed that Yan Wushi's victory was due to his powerful internal energy, and not the strength of his finger technique. The loggerheads were about to explode. Yan Wushi gave a sneering laugh. Before he could take further action, Shen Qiao stepped forward. Li Gongzi, the death of the Zhongnan sect leader and the sect's forced assimilation into Huan sect must have made quite a few waves in the Jianghu. As I wish to know more of the details, might Li Gongzi spare some time to elaborate on this? Li Qingyu tossed a glance at Yan Wushi, then nodded. But of course. Shen Qiao gestured for him to enter the house. Please come in. Then he said to Yan Wushi, would Sect Leader Yan also like to come, or do you have other pressing matters? In Shen Qiao's view, Li Qingyu was here as a guest, yet Yan Wushi had provoked him for no reason whatsoever. This was considerably unacceptable. If a fight had broken out between the two, regardless of who was injured, Bixia sect would suffer. Yan Wushi suddenly pursed his lips into a smile, and the frigid cold of his expression thawed, transforming into a warm spring breeze. You two can chat. I'm a bit hungry, so I'll head to the kitchen to see if there's something to eat. Bizarre, thought Shen Qiao. He couldn't predict Yan Wushi's temper, which often felt like sudden rainfall rolling in on a bright sunny day. He watched him walk away and couldn't help but shake his head, then headed inside the house to talk with Li Qingyu. Zhongnan sect's tragedy this time had caused it to crumble completely. The sons of wealthy aristocratic families like Jiangsu and Zheng were fine. Even without a sect, they could still return home. But the ordinary disciples who completely relied on the sect were in much greater trouble. They were forced to take sides, either submit to Huan sect and become an external disciple, or oppose Huan sect and defect to another sect, like Qingtang Mountain's Chunyang Monastery. And due to the sword trial conference being hosted there, dark undercurrents were now stirring beneath the peaceful surface. In truth, Chunyang Monastery had already become the third force in a power triangle with Huan sect and the Buddhist discipline. All the sects in the north that refused to attach themselves to Huan sect or the Buddhist sects had sought out Chunyang Monastery for protection. In the south, the Yangtze River serving as a barrier and Linchuan Academy's position of power meant that, for the time being, Huan sect and the Buddhist discipline failed to make significant inroads there. It was the unknowingly planted willow that granted shade. Yipi Chun never expected this result, but as Chunyang Monastery had already planned to enter the secular world, he naturally had no reason to reject it. That they were hosting the sword trial conference was also proof of what the public wanted. However, in just over half a year, the world situation had undergone such an upheaval, it was truly lamentable. Heroes from all over will arrive at the sword trial conference, said Li Qingyu, so it's a good opportunity for everyone to exchange pointers and improve their swords. Shutsun hopes that Daoxiong can attend as well, when the time comes, to discuss the friendship between Taoists. If I count Qilang, I've accepted 2 disciples, says Shen Qiao. They've just begun their apprenticeship, so at this time, stabilizing their foundation is of utmost importance. If I'm not here, I fear that without any guidance, it'll be easy for them to go astray. Li Qingyu was unconcerned. When I was practicing as a child, Shitsun only ever taught things once, and we were left to understand on our own. The martial path has always been inseparable from natural talent. If someone has neither talent nor aptitude, they might as well live as fisherman or woodcutter. That would be better than squandering their remaining years. Though these were callous words, they weren't without reason. But someone like Shen Qiao could never say such things, so he simply smiled. Let me consider this matter. I will return and discuss this with them, then make my decision. Li Qingyu nodded. Shen Qiao remembered something. Has Li Gongzi heard any news of Xuandu Mountain? I have not. The last news Shen Qiao knew of Yu Ai was that he'd participated in the group assault on Yan Wushi. Afterward, Shen Qiao never saw him again. Yu Ai was determined for Xuandu Mountain to stand at the top of the Taoist discipline once more, but his goal had gotten off to a rocky start from the beginning. First, Chunyang Monastery had stolen their momentum, then he'd conspired with the Gokturks, hoping to use their strength to bolster Xuandu Mountains. But such calculations were based on wishful thinking that was unlikely to come true. In the end, it was like trying to draw water with a bamboo basket and coming up empty. After the initial shock and sorrow of betrayal passed, whenever Shen Qiao now thought about anything related to Xuandu Mountain, it seemed like a hazy, misty dreamscape, beautiful yet unreal. If you wish to return to Xuandu Mountain, I can ask Shitsun to lend you a hand, Li Qingyu offered. Shen Qiao shook his head and laughed despite himself. Thank you, but only the things you obtain through your own abilities are likely to last. Li Qingyu saw that he'd already made his decision, so he only nodded and spoke no more on the topic. The two of them conversed for a while. When it was nearly noon, one of the Bixia sect disciples, Zhou Yexue, came and knocked on the door. Li Shishong, the sect leader is currently discussing an important matter with our Shifu. She specifically told this disciple to come and invite Li Shishong and Taoist Master Shen to the flower hall for lunch. Whether they should attend the sword trial conference was a vital issue to Bixia sect, so it was imperative for Zhao Chiying to discuss it with Yue Kunshi. It made sense that she was unable to spare the time to personally receive Li Qingyu right away. Zhou Yexue was 16 years old, at the age where she was lovely and delicate like a flower. Li Qingyu was around the same age, and they both used swords. In terms of background, they were already compatible as partners. If affections could blossom between them, it'd make for a lovely story. Though Yi Pichun himself had not married, he never demanded for his disciples to do the same. Chunyang Monastery had almost no female disciples. If Li Qingyu chose not to marry for the rest of his life, he could focus on the sword, and that was fine. If he wished to find a wife and have children, Bixia sect's female disciples were outstandingly beautiful, and there was no lack of choice either. As Zhao Chiying had sent Zhou Yexue to receive them, it was clear she felt the same way. However, it seemed that Li Qingyu had no such thoughts, for he said, "Thank you for informing us, but since sect leader Zhao won't be present, I won't be going either. Could you bring 2 meals for Shen Daojiang and myself? I wish to ask for his guidance on the sword, so we can simply eat here." Clearly, Zhou Yexue had never met someone so insensitive and unromantic before. She stared at him for a long while before she slowly said, "All right." Then she turned right around and left without looking back. The one who came to deliver the meals some time later was not her, but Fan Yuanbai. As a bystander, Shen Qiao could see things clearly. He saw that the young maiden had seemed interested in Li Qingyu, but it was obvious that Li Qingyu didn't feel the same way. Of course, trying to instigate anything would be too awkward, so he pretended to have seen nothing. Today's chef was not the one from the foot of the mountain, so both the side dishes and soup tasted quite average. Shen Qiao ladled out half a bowl of the soup. He was halfway through before he realized it was fish soup, and it looked like fish head soup. He looked at Li Qingyu, whose head was lowered as he drank. For some reason, Shen Qiao was suddenly hit with the feeling that this was terribly comical. He wanted to laugh, but also thought it'd be rather unkind, so he immediately shut the idea down. "This soup is quite good," said Li Qingyu. Shen Chao gave a dry laugh. He didn't know how to reply and only said, "These vegetables are also quite fresh." As these words left his mouth, Yan Wushi's face abruptly flashed through his mind, but he repudiated it right away. Surely the great and lofty Huanyue sect leader wouldn't do something so childish. Zhao Chiying's contemplation quickly came to an end. She decided to bring Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yexue to Chunyang Monastery and attend the sword trial conference. Yue Kunshi would stay behind to oversee matters at the sect. Shen Qiao had wanted to remain as well, but Zhao Chiying herself suggested that Shen Qiao come with them. She dearly valued this friend with whom she'd weathered hardships. Currently, Bixia sect was very weak, so it would be incredibly difficult for Zhao Chiying to stand out on her own. She indeed needed Shen Qiao's help. Shen Qiao agreed. He assigned Shiwu and Yuan Song some homework and told them to train properly with Yue Kunshi. Yuan Song had grown up in a rich and powerful clan, so here on Mount Tai, he was filled with curiosity and an insatiable desire to explore. Right now, he was in the phase where he could enjoy things for hours without ever growing bored. Shiwu was his Shishong, but he possessed a gentle personality and he'd usually go along with Yuan Song. He'd only grow insistent when important matters arose. The two Marshall brothers got along very well, so Shen Qiao didn't worry about leaving them on their own. The group quickly finished packing and set out on their journey. Chapter 97. Reappearance in the Jianghu. The journey from Mount Tai to Qingteng Mountain was not a short one. In fact, it spanned almost half the nation of Zhou. If they wanted to arrive within half a month, they had to travel briskly. Fortunately, everyone, even the young maiden Zhou Yexue, had been on trips where they needed to travel through the night before. By making haste, they'd managed to pass Chang'an within 10 days and arrive in Hanzhong. 5 days remained until the sword trial conference, allowing them to relax their pace somewhat and travel slower. They'd spent the entire journey thus far hurrying on horseback, and even the horses could scarcely take such a strenuous speed any longer. Now they could finally stop to catch their breath, to everyone's delight. Being younger, Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yexue were especially happy, and their faces shone with joy. Li Qingyu wasn't even 2 years older than them, but he was much more stolid. His face remained as cold and solemn as it'd been when they'd set out. The news of the sword trial conference had already spread throughout the land. As they traveled, they saw many Jianghu warriors carrying swords. After entering Hanzhong, those types only grew more numerous, with all kinds of people carrying all kinds of weapons. Places teeming with Jianghu members would, of course, also teem with Jianghu matters. As the saying went, a scholar disrupts the law with the pen, while a warrior flouts it through the sword. Many people who knew martial arts felt it gave them the right to look down upon the common people, leading them to arrogance and a sense of superiority. And their actions would grow more unscrupulous. Shen Qiao's party had already encountered 3 such conflicts on their trip. This time, they arrived early. The sun had just begun to set as they entered the city, and the inn still had a fair number of empty rooms. There weren't many people in the hall on the first floor either. Zhao Chiying and the others first booked their rooms, then took their seats. Yan Wushi was special, so almost anyone in the party kept a respectful distance from him. Zhao Chiying feared this Huanyue sect leader, who was neither friend nor foe, and though she didn't want to offend him, she also didn't want to get too close. The Bixia sect disciples, having suffered his torture, were even more terrified of him. No one dared to provoke him. Zhao Chiying and her 2 disciples, together with Li Qingyu, perfectly filled a table of 4, while Yan Wushi sat alone at another table, surrounded by empty seats. Onlookers found the sight rather strange. Shen Qiao walked over and sat down across from him. Ah Qiao couldn't bear to see me alone, so he specially came to sit at my table. The number of guests will only increase. Eventually, there won't be enough seats, and they'll be forced to rush their customers. I just don't want to cause the innkeeper any trouble. Yan Wushi found the words insincere and remained unbothered. He raised his hand to pour Shen Qiao a cup of freshly warmed wine. The innkeeper must have spent 3 lifetimes accumulating fortune to be blessed with a guest like you. For a moment, Shun Chao felt like there was a deeper meaning to Yan Wushi's words, but after zoning out for a moment, he thought that he must have perceived wrongly. Once I finish my meal, I'll head out first, Yan Wushi told him. I won't be traveling with you anymore. Shun Chao was a bit taken aback. I thought you were traveling with us in order to meet with Yipi Chan at Chunyang Monastery. Even if Yipi Chan's martial abilities weren't good enough for number 1, it would still be a simple matter for him to rank within the top 3. It was indeed rather strange for Yan Wushi to see such an opportunity, yet not go and request the fight. Yan Wushi shook his head. I can meet with Yipi Chan at any time, but the chance to watch someone's downfall? That's not something that happens every day. There was an overpowering presence of schadenfreude within his tone, and one name immediately came to Shun Chao's mind. Do Yan Shan? The bait has been laid for long enough, said Yan Wushi. It's time to reel in the net. How could my venerable self not watch when something this exciting is about to happen? You told me before that Yuan Fuyi and Do Yan Shan were only keeping up a harmonious appearance, and that sooner or later they would begin taking action, said Shun Chao. Yuan Fuyi's influence within the Liu He Guild is still too weak, so she was forced to borrow the strength of the Huang family along with the Gokturks, who are now backing them and secretly execute her plan that way. Correct, said Yan Wushi. Since you're able to swiftly determine their every move, I trust that you've also contributed to adding fuel to this fire. Yan Wushi was all smiles. My Chao is truly so clever. Do Yan Shan is both deeply cunning and incredibly mistrustful. He won't allow those he doesn't trust to get close enough to hear his secrets. It's thanks to this prudence of his that the Liu He Guild was able to expand bit by bit over the years, becoming the dragon's head that dominates the water routes in both the north and south. Can you guess how I broke through these defenses to plant my spies within? Shun Chao's brow furrowed. He thought for a moment, then said slowly, I cannot guess. Yan Wushi smiled. In truth, it is very simple. Though Do Yan Shan is indeed prudent, the people close to him may not be. He has a personal servant who's followed him for 8 years. The man is clever and capable, but there's also a woman he loves deeply. That woman's family demands money from her without end. Though she was unwilling to trouble her beloved, she also had no solution and suffered greatly. At that time, I had Bian Mei send someone to help her resolve this issue, all while doing something else. You were able to control Do Yan Shan's servant through her? Yan Wushi shook his head and burst into laughter. Ah, Chao, you're too naive. Do Yan Shan's servant is clever and capable, so how could such a crude method work on him? Bian Mei simply used this matter to foster a favorable impression with that woman. He used the false identity, pretending that he was a distant relative who'd not contacted them for years. This way, he won the trust of that woman's family and is now able to move around as her distant cousin. That seems far too convoluted. Don't underestimate the powers of family relations, said Yan Wushi. No one will believe your kindly intentions if you're an unrelated stranger. Adding an identity like that into the mix will always make them drop their guard, at least a little. Within a few interactions, this woman trusted this cousin of hers greatly, and she even introduced him to Do Yan Shan's servant. As he listened to Yan Wushi describe the steps he'd undertaken, all meticulously interlocked, Shun Chao heaved a silent sigh. Both the imperial court and the Jianghu were mere games to this man. His contemptuous arrogance and extreme egotism had earned him countless enemies, sprouting as thickly as trees in a forest. In the end, 5 great martial artists had ambushed him, and he'd almost lost both his life and reputation. But nonetheless, his martial arts capabilities and sense of strategy were undeniable. According to what you just said, Do Yan Shan's servant is both intelligent and capable, said Shun Chao. How could that older cousin win his trust? Yan Wushi sent him an unruffled smile. By offering him benefits. In this world, only common interests can bind people together, even more intimately than brothers and spouses. As that servant followed Do Yan Shan, he must have witnessed many lavish events dripping with decadence and extravagance, yet he himself remains only a servant. Do you think that a clever and capable man would be satisfied seeing this? If the woman's cousin gave him a way to earn money, meaning he could own and manage his own business, wouldn't he eventually come to see that cousin as a close friend and ally? Understanding dawned on Shanqiao. So you purposely chose someone who was shrewd and not someone honest and straightforward? Because you knew that he'd be dissatisfied with his current situation? Honest people have their own weaknesses, said Yan Wushi. Where can you find a person who's perfect and flawless? Shanqiao nodded. That's true. If you didn't possess such an exaggerated opinion of yourself back then, always looking down on others, Guangling San and Douyan Shan would have never gotten that opportunity. He was clearly mocking Yan Wushi, but he'd overlooked how shameless this man was. Yan Wushi simply gave a slow, dignified smile and said, You're wrong. That was a weakness of my past self, not my present self. Shanqiao couldn't stop himself from laughing. Then this distinguished master's present weakness is a face that's thicker than Mount Tai's stones are wide? Though his countenance held a warm and gentle smile, it was rare for him to laugh freely. It wasn't a loud laugh, but the corners of his lips couldn't help but stretch upward, and unceasingly so. Even his eyes were sparkling, like jade stones soaked in rainwater, vibrant and beautiful. That's a strength, not a weakness. Yan Wushi was the type to act on whatever whims floated to mind. As soon as this notion emerged, his hand was already on Shanqiao's. This venerable one's present weakness is you. Oh my God. Shanqiao shook his head, and the look on his face said that he'd just heard something even more hilarious. He wanted to pull back his hand, but Yan Wushi's grip was tight. Sec Leader Yan, some tricks are tiresome if performed more than once, so why perform them again and again? No matter what a fool someone is, truly they won't fall into the same pit twice. Within his words lay a trace of self-mockery, something that he perhaps didn't even realize himself. Do you remember the tale I told you last time? Yan Wushi's smile remained unchanged. His eyes stayed fixed on Shanqiao, and he didn't release his hand either. Before this point, Shanqiao's thoughts on their relationship had never strayed to improper paths. After a snake bite, a person would fear ropes for 10 years. After his experience of unrequited friendship, Shanqiao had gained a deeper understanding of Yan Wushi's callousness. He knew this man's heart to be as hard as stone. Even if he demonstrated the utmost sincerity, it would never amount to more than wishful thinking, for it was near impossible to move this man. In truth, down in the depths of his heart, Shanqiao no longer dared to believe him, for that memory was carved too deep. He was simply unable to trust this man again, in fear of repeating his past mistakes. However, at this moment, beneath that scorching gaze, Shanqiao's heart gave a thump. He felt like prey being glared at by a predator, one that wouldn't give up until it caught its quarry. Just then, a loud voice came from a short distance away, diverting his attention. Innkeeper, there are clearly 2 empty seats there. Why did you say that you were full? Shanqiao took the chance to pull his hand away. He looked around to realize that at some point, without his notice, the inn had filled up and the only empty seats left were at their table. As he was sitting across from Yan Wushi, the spots beside each of them remained open. People at this time were unaccustomed to sharing a table with strangers, and they generally wouldn't insist on sitting with people they didn't know. But some didn't mind, and, secure in their martial abilities, they'd be confident that the other party wouldn't be able to refuse. This was often a source of disputes within the Jianghu. The innkeeper was obviously reluctant to see his place become a site for such a dispute. He quickly gave an apologetic smile and tried to explain, saying that if they waited a while, some guests would finish their meal and leave, freeing up some seats. But the loudmouth in question was unwilling to compromise, and his companions also looked like they weren't people to be trifled with. Not only had they noticed that only Shanqiao and Yan Wushi's table held 2 empty seats, they also saw that Shanqiao was dressed in Taoist robes with a kindly face that made him seem easy to push around. Meanwhile, Yan Wushi didn't even have a weapon. Both men looked like soft persimmons, easy to crush. If it'd been two strong, strapping men with fierce expressions sitting there instead, they might not have dared to be so rash. I've seen those people before. They're from Taohua Pier. Ever since Taohua Pier was absorbed into Hehuan's sect, they've become swollen with pride, holding everyone else in contempt. Using Hehuan's sect's banner, they've been running amok. Everyone fears Hehuan's sect's reputation and is unwilling to offend them. No wonder they're strutting about like this, said someone from the table beside them. Just dogs that go around biting others because their master is powerful. Shh! Careful that you don't talk yourself into trouble. Martially, they're quite strong. Last time, even Tianshan's Yu Junse ended up humiliated at that loudmouth's hands. Huh? There was a sharp gasp of surprise. But as a martial expert, Tianshan's Yu Junse is only a little below first rate. Right? How could they strut about like that otherwise? That loudmouth is Tao Hua Pier Master's younger brother. His moniker is the Stream Severing Saber. Oh, I've heard of him. The Stream Severing Saber. R. Dumming. So it was him? Though the conversation from the table beside them wasn't loud, Yan Wushi and Shen Chao still heard it. That loudmouth had already pushed aside the innkeeper and was now striding toward them. Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yeshui were young and imperious, so upon seeing this, they were about to rise and stop the man. Naturally, they had no interest in protecting Yan Wushi, but Shen Chao was a good man, and he had done a great kindness to Bixia sect. In the 6 months he stayed on Mount Tai, his relationship with everyone there had only grown closer. He wasn't like Yan Wushi, who'd pass judgments whenever the whim came. Instead, he would amiably answer every question asked of him. Whenever he taught his disciples, he'd also let Fan Yuanbai and the others watch on the sidelines. All of this had greatly benefited Bixia sect. Fan Yuanbai and the others all saw him as a teacher or an older brother, so they were naturally displeased to see someone else be so rude and disrespectful toward him. In the end, Zhao Chiying was more experienced and reserved. She didn't move at all. Instead, she called out loudly, "Innkeeper, where is the mutton stew I ordered for table 6? Why haven't you delivered it to them yet? Huan Yue sect leader Yan and Taoist master Shen Chao have been waiting for a long time." The moment these two names were spoken, especially the first of them, it was like a frigid wind had blown through the hall. Everyone froze. That loudmouth's footsteps stopped, frozen in midair and unable to move another inch. All right, everyone, that concludes the reading of chapters 94 through 97. I would love to hear your thoughts on these last 4 chapters. I found them very interesting. So I just wanted to talk to you guys about a few things, not too many, because there's not a lot to talk about. But number 1, Yan Wushi is still hilarious. Like, I can't tell you how many times I had to pause the recording from laughter. And I know there's still some in here, so you know what? It's just whatever. Anyway, the points I want to make are actually pretty Yan Wushi heavy. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that I'm really still loving the evolution of Yan Wushi, even though, of course, he still has that very egotistical way about him. And, you know, he doesn't like to admit that he's wrong. There are little things that I believe are showing on the up and up for him and Shen Chao. But just, you know, for him in general. Like, for example, being able to finally admit to Shen Chao, like, hey, I actually see you as a friend now. And the perspective that I had before, that was the before me. That was the old me. But the new me sees that you are a precious jade. And like, not even in just these 4 chapters that I read, but even the few before, on multiple occasions, he has acknowledged Shen Chao's greatness in some capacity, whether it be his character or even his skills. And I just love that so freaking much because he usually doesn't compliment people. And you even see that in how he interacts with people at Bixia sect. Now, even if he was just putting on airs for Shen Chao, still it doesn't matter because these are things he wouldn't do before. But him being kind to others sometimes and acknowledging certain things about people that were good shows his evolution as a person, if for nothing else but to please Shen Chao. But like, I even think about the fact that it said that he had been teaching the disciples there, even if it was, you know, a little more on the harsh side. I mean, honestly, that's how he is with Yu Shengyan and probably with Bian Yanmei. But I feel like he probably wouldn't have been willing to teach someone else's disciples before. Anyway, that's pretty much all I'll say about Yan Wushi. One of the things that I strongly believe about people when it comes to evolution, whether it's just through their character or, evolution and religion and everything like that, is that people at their core will remain the same even though they may change. I guess a great way my husband put it actually is same energy, different spirit. And so, like, I personally don't think that just because he's growing in these certain areas means that he has to suddenly not be arrogant, and egotistical. Like, he's still a confident man who knows that he's badass. And that's not going to change just because now he's able to say a few words about people or to people or do things that are not necessarily within his character. But yeah, I say the same thing for even like someone who, for example, decided to go to church and they got saved, and all that stuff. At their core, I believe they are fundamentally the same. Like, they're not going to suddenly, if they were a goofy person, become not goofy just because they've transformed and, dedicated their life to Christ. There are certain aspects of a person that are just going to remain there. And so I love that he's not completely doing a 180 or anything like that, but we still get that raw, wonderful Yan Wushi. The other thing I have to say is that, okay, Huan sect is just extremely cruel and I hate it so much. And it's interesting because we have the Huan sect, Fajing sect, and Huanyue sect. And of course, Yan Wushi is the leader of Huanyue sect. And all throughout the novel, people are calling him, such a headache, basically, as a leader of a demonic sect and how horrible he is and blah, 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 snore. But like, Sang Jing you are going around dominating places, annihilating people, and then giving the people who are submitting under you the wherewithal, the gall to start bullying other people. Like, he is really the true menace. And I just think that it's ironic when you see the difference between Yan Wushi and Sang Jingxing and I guess Yan Xiuxiu, because she's a part of that too, technically. But Yan Wushi really doesn't go out of his way to make trouble for common people, And even the things he wanted to do with Emperor Yuan Yong was ultimately to help the common people, whether he was doing it for selfish reasons or because he actually cares and he just, we'll just never know that because it's never revealed. The point is, he actually loves stability in the country, and he wants things to work out smoothly. Whereas Huan sect is just like, we're going to do whatever the F we want. Boom, boom, boom. And it's crazy. So, yeah. Also, I'm very glad to know that the Su family is okay because as I was reading at first, when it said that Huan sect even like took over Zhongnan sect and killed their sect leader, I was like, oh no, what about the Su family? But Shun Xiao asked for me because he knew that I was concerned. So anyway, that's really all I have to say about these 4 chapters. I am very excited to get into the next 4. It's going to be chapters 98 through 101. As long as I don't die or anything crazy, those will be available tomorrow. So I will see you all later. 我爱你们.